These protests have led to conversations about race. It's led to some policy reform now, and it's also led to unlikely friendships. My next two guests forged a bond following protests in Richmond, Virginia. During a recent protest, business owner Marquise Rose made his way downtown, where several stores had been looted and damaged. And while there, he met a white police officer striking up a conversation about policing and posting their exchange on Facebook Live. Here they are reflecting on that exchange.
We already don't do chokeholds. We already don't do a maneuver that puts our knee on somebody's neck. We already police each other, as in if we see an officer getting upset or is getting emotional on a scene, we remove them from that.
Every officer is not a bad officer. And I want people to know that, whether they're black, white, Hispanic, whatever color, but at the same time, there are some bad officers out there. And those officers need to be identified, removed from the streets, or as we say, retrain officers with people like Officer Shore, hopefully can train them.
Joining us now, that Richmond business owner, Marquise Rose, and Richmond police officer, Christopher Shore. Great to have both of you here, and I'm hoping we can all learn from your situation. Marquise, first, take me back to when you first approached Officer Shore. What kind of response were you expecting?
I was expecting a different approach. When I first approached him, I was a little guarded to see a white officer. I said, maybe he's going to come off a little rude to me. But immediately he just kind of joined the conversation and he felt very comfortable talking to me.
Officer Shore, what was your first reaction when you saw Marquise approaching?
You know, I thought it was great. I love to see the community out there after the violence we had seen over the past couple of nights. Marquise had come out to help clean up, and I saw the community start banding together and start having a conversation, and I knew I just needed to be a part of that.
So, Marquise, I'm wondering, because we hear so often that people are not trusting police officers. Was that your experience? Did you feel distrust there, and did Officer Shore have to earn that trust from you, or did you already give him the benefit of the doubt?
When I first approached him, I did not trust him. As being an African-American male living in Richmond, Virginia, it was a different situation. But once I was able to have a conversation, and he welcomed himself into my conversation, and he immediately decided with a black audience to engage myself and every individual. And he said, Marquise, you know, I'm here for a reason. I've been a police officer for 10 years, working the black community, and I'm honored to do so. So I felt more comfortable.
Were you surprised by all the attention your Facebook Live conversation with Officer Shore received?
I was very surprised. Actually, as I began, I walked about 20 blocks from City Hall all the way down to where the last building was on fire, Detail R. And I didn't see at first how many people were viewing, and it hit like 400, it hit 700. And by the end of the day, people said, yo, thousands of people viewed this video. And I'm going, really? What does that mean?
Wow. Officer Shore, what did you learn from this experience?
You know, I really learned from Marquise and the other individuals that were out there. There are individuals who want to open that dialogue, and that we do need to earn the trust of the community. You know, we make deposits to that trust account every day, and small interactions we can have like this at the local level really help to bridge that gap and make people like Marquise and others see that we really are just human. We're trying to make a difference in the communities that we serve, and I'm just a small part of that.
Marquise, what would be your message to protesters across the nation right now trying to deal with their anger over the death of George Floyd at the hands of police?
I want to say to each protester, understand what protesting is, understand what looting is, understanding what vandalizing is. But at the same time, there are some bad officers. At the same time, there are good officers. But change has to happen. And I encourage everyone, your voice can be heard November the 3rd. It starts there by voting and understanding that your power is in your vote. But change has got to happen by people understanding. Back in the day, people burnt down churches. Back in our history, they burnt down communities to have their voice heard. And that's what's happening now. People are burning down things to have their voice heard. And so we have to understand that what happened then, is it impactful for today? Is it the same approach that we must take? Or must we take the action by first training, mentoring, leadership, development, and of course, by voting?
Officer Shore, then let me flip the question to you and ask for your message to, fellow officers, to police departments across the U.S. struggling to communicate with the African American community, struggling to get that trust, to earn that trust as they are trying to protect and serve them?
You know, you have to look at where it works. And fortunately, here in the city of Richmond, it really works. We have a great relationship with our community, and that's built on mutual trust. We've been fostering that relationship for a long time. Our chief of police has always been very open with the dialogue. All of our documentation, from our use of force to our interactions with the public, are readily available online, made easy for the public to access. And for individual officers out there, we have to take accountability of ourselves first, and ensure that we're policing our own, ensure that we're putting the best foot and the best message and the best individuals forward to serve the communities that we work with.
What was your reaction to seeing that video from George Floyd with his death?
My reaction, heartbroken. Unfortunately, through my service in the Marine Corps and my 10 years with the police department, I've seen way too much death for one life. But it was heartbreaking. It was heartbreaking because it was avoidable with better training, better knowledge, better experience by the officers. It was avoidable just by one of those officers taking a step and putting an end to it.
Final question to both of you. Marquise, you first. What is the biggest obstacle preventing more positive conversations like yours between African-American communities and white law enforcement officers?
I think people are afraid to approach police officers because of the history for the past 50 plus years. I believe we have to understand that officers' approach first is not to grab their weapon, is not to be defensive. But at the same time, civilians, community people like myself, we have to understand the approach by first obeying the laws. And if we decide to approach an officer, think twice before we make a decision.
Officer Shore, your response?
You know, the major thing is that we all just have to realize that we're each human beings. We're each trying to go our own way in the world and do what's best for each other. And it's important for officers to attempt to bridge that gap, especially with the minority communities they serve. And, you know, what Marquise was saying, come with open arms and a positive message, and you can get pretty far.
Officer Christopher Shore and Marquise Rose, thanks for the conversation. Thank you for sharing your story and being voice to many others who are in your shoes. Thank you. Up next, we will head back to the streets as Americans across the country demand